and welcome to Chapter 1 lecture. For this chapter, you will be reading all the sections for Chapter 1. For other lectures, I will tell you which chapters you need to read. We will not cover everything in this book. But for Chapter 1, you will need to read all sections. First off, I want to tell you about how to be successful in this class. It is very important that you follow these steps if you want to be successful. The first thing that you need to do is read the textbook. I know it's kind of an archaic thing anymore. Students don't like to read, but you should. You need to read the assigned readings. We don't do that for fun, for sport, where we assign readings to you. You should do that preferably before you come to class and that we can actually cover that topic in class. This is done so that you are exposed to it before you come to class, and that way it's not completely new to you and so unknown that you cannot even focus on things that you, let's say you were missing at home. It would be, if you never saw it before and you came to class, it would be completely unknown to you. And if you read the textbook, you may not understand everything you read, and that's okay, but at least you are familiar with some of the content. And so when you come to class and we cover the material in class and talk about those topics, you at least have some idea of what we're talking about. That's why this is done. Second, while you read the text, take good notes. You can write out questions you might have or other points that you are not so sure about when you're reading the textbook. And when you come to class then and you hear it again, you can either ask those questions if they do not become clearer, or they will become clearer when we cover that chapter, that material in class. So these two go hand in hand, the assigned readings and taking good notes. Take good notes during lecture. Sometimes I cover or I do explanations a little differently than what we cover in the textbook or the way they're in the textbook. So take good notes and ask questions, whether it's the questions that you wrote down when you were reading the textbook or whether it's questions that come up as we talk about this material. Then ask questions. Do not be shy. I know students are shy about asking questions because they're concerned about what the next person's going to think. Chances are the next person has the same questions you do. So be brave and ask questions. I always think of it as this is, well, when I was a student, I thought this is my education. I am paying for it. Therefore, I have the right to ask my questions and for the instructor to address my questions. I didn't care what the person next to me thought because guess what? In 4 years, you would, well, even less, depending on the school you attend, you will never see or hear these students again, from these students again. So it's pointless to tailor your needs in a class depending on who's sitting next to you because you'll never see those people again, chances are. So make sure that you ask questions. Do not be shy about that. I assign worksheets for each chapter, and I do that for several reasons. One is because I want you to do the problems, and I want you, there's the only way to really understand science and understand the material in a science class is to work and to do the problems that you are assigned in each chapter. Now, we don't have homework in this class to be graded, but what I do is I assign you worksheets, and then when we do have quizzes, which we'll have daily quizzes, I take those problems from the quizzes, typically from the worksheets. And so the worksheets will help you succeed in the daily quizzes if you do the worksheets. I do not provide you with the solutions to the worksheets. However, you are free to ask me any questions on the worksheets. You can email them to me, take a picture, scan your work and send them to me and say, hey, professor, I've done this far, this much. Could you please tell me if I've done them right or not? And I will give you feedback on those and let you know if you've done them correctly or not. So don't be deterred just because you don't have the answers. Work on the worksheets and check with me whether you've done them right or not. Organize a study group. This is another great tool to utilize. A lot of times, well, when I was a student, I did study with other people, and it just helps. Even if you know the material, it helps to solidify it. When you teach it to other people, that's how you really learn it. Or whether you are a student who's still struggling, you will benefit from somebody else that actually knows the material better than you. So find other students that are in the class and are have similar schedules or similar interests, whatever, and organize a little study group and study every week, study together. It's a good tool. Obviously, ask questions of your instructor. That is a main theme throughout any science course, any course in general, but science in particular. Ask questions. Don't be shy. The more questions you ask, the better you will do. And then I have this repeated because this is really, really important. Review the material. Review, review, review. Review daily. You don't have to, you'll find that the more you review, the more often you review, the less time you will spend reviewing. In fact, I want to show you this graph here. It's called the curve of forgetting. And let's say you were here in day one and you heard that first lecture. On day one, you know 100% of what you will know on that particular lecture. So whatever you have cemented, whatever you have learned after the lecture, we'll call that 100%. It may not be to the 100% of what it should be, but it's 100% for you personally on day one. Now, if you don't do any review, by day 30, you will have retained maybe 90%, or you will have retained maybe 10%. You've forgotten about 90% of that original 100% that you learned. These days also coincide or are very close to exam day. And therefore, if you're on day 30 and have not reviewed anything, you get ready for the exam and you start cramming, typically what students do, and find out that, oops, I actually don't recall any of this information, so it looks new to you on day 30. And you have to relearn all of that stuff to get your retaining up to 100% to where you had it on day one. Now let's say on day two, you reviewed for 10 minutes. You get this curve as it's dropping, you get it back up to almost 100% of what you had on day one. And if you do that every day, let's see, day 7, all you need to do is review only 5 minutes to keep it to 100%. And then by day 30, it only takes about 2 to 4 minutes of review to keep that initial 100% of your curve. This is just to show you that with a little bit of reviewing each day, once again, it will get easier. You will not have to review as much as the days progress because you will learn it better, but also you will retain a lot more. And by day 30, when you have to prepare for the exam, it will not appear all new to you. It will appear pretty much as it was on the first day of class when you heard it. That is why I insist on review, 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 because it is really important. If you are serious about doing well in this class, please follow those steps because they will definitely help you. Let's talk about a few technical things. What text are we using? We are using Chemistry Atoms First, and this is an open educational resource. We do this because it is cheaper. If you actually only work with the electronic copy, that is free. If you want a copy, an actual hard copy of the text is about $50, which is just the cost for them to print it. And we coordinate this with the Chem 141, 142 sequence. For those of you that will end up taking these sequence, you will see this textbook again, so you don't have to buy another one. We cover about the same topics as is covered in 141, 142, but not as in depth. So we cover same concepts, not as in depth, and that's why I am going to direct you on which chapters to read out of this textbook, and which sections of each chapter, because the Chem 141, 142 covers a little more than what we do. Obviously, the first reading assignment is the chapter 1, all sections of chapter 1. All the sections that you will need to read are listed in the syllabus. If you print out the syllabus, which I highly recommend, you look in there, there's a list of, it's kind of a schedule for the lecture and lab. It's a tentative schedule because it sometimes changes, but it's a schedule that we're going to try to adhere for the class. So print it out, and then all the chapter sections that you need to read are listed in there. That will be very helpful for you. Here's the outline for chapter 1. We have section 1 from 1.1 to 1.6, and we're going to talk about each of these in turn. Let's focus on the first one, chemistry and context. Section 1.1. Well, chemistry is obviously the branch of science that studies chemicals. It's always been there, even though we may not have thought of it as chemistry. And I dare say most of the people who aren't necessarily into science, they don't really think in terms of chemistry. They don't really think in terms of chemicals, although we use them every day. Chemicals are in our food. They're in the water. Water is a chemical, even though we don't think of it as a chemical, but it is. So it's everywhere. There's these 2 points are basically it's always been there, and it will be, and it's everywhere. Everywhere we turn around, all our clothes are made of chemicals. I mentioned food, what we eat, what we are made of chemicals, even though once again we don't think about it. But we are. So look at chemistry. It's kind of a central science because it can branch out to so many other sciences, and it ties into so many other sciences. Chemistry you can go into engineering. That's a crossover to engineering, chemical engineering, material science, a huge branch right now. Nanoscience, nanotechnology, huge right now as well. Chemical physics, it's a crossover to physics and mathematics and nuclear chemistry and environmental science, biochemistry and molecular biology. These are my 2 loves. I'm a chemist, but I really love the chemistry of the body, the biological systems, living things, whereas my husband is mostly into this branch, mathematics and physics and chemistry. So you'll find many divisions of, or you find chemists working in not just chemistry as a central science, but crossing over to many other different disciplines. So it is everywhere, and it's always been there. We've just discovered bits and pieces of it as a history of mankind has gone along, and it will be there long after we're gone too. So it's an interesting science to me, and I love it because it does cross over to so many other branches. So it gives you a wide field. If you are a chemist and you do very well at chemistry, you understand very well, you can cross over into many other different sciences and do them just as well. First of all, though, after we talked about this, all the sciences, they are based on the scientific method. So we use the scientific method in all areas of science, but we're going to focus mainly on chemistry to do certain to actually understand what we're doing and to standardize what we're doing, we use the scientific method. Because if all of us in all different places and all different laboratories, did things our own way, there wouldn't be a way to really standardize and utilize to compare, well, is my way correct or is your way correct? But if we have the same model that we're all following, then we can standardize the results. And that way, if I'm doing something in the lab here in America, somebody in Germany can do the same thing that I'm doing and follow my results and double check to make sure that I've done it correctly or that my results are interpreted correctly, etc., etc. For this, we use the steps of the scientific method. Most of you are familiar with it, but we're going to review it anyway. The first step is to observe. It comes out of curious people, curiosity. Sometimes it kills the cat, but sometimes it's good. We get curious about the world around us, and I have found that little kids are the best at this because they are curious about everything. They observe a lot more than we do. We have become kind of, I wouldn't say callous, but oblivious because we have other things to take care of, or we've seen this many, many times, so it's not a big deal to us. Well, for little kids, little things can be huge to them. So first step is just to be able to be observant, to be able to observe something that goes on around us. The step two then would be, okay, I observed something, but I want to explain it now. Why is it that this phenomenon is happening? We then make what is called a hypothesis to attempt to explain the observations that we see. Then the next step after I make the hypothesis is I want to test it. So I make an experiment to either prove or disprove my hypothesis. That way, I have something concrete. It's not just something abstract that I came up with. It has to be something concrete. And that's why scientific hypotheses, they have to be testable. They cannot just be something that is abstract because we have to be able to devise an experiment to test it in a laboratory. And then the step 4, we repeat our experiments, maybe change them up a little bit, but if they do support our hypothesis, original hypothesis, then it becomes a theory. We will talk about all these steps in turns and what they mean, but I want to focus really on the theory and the hypothesis connection because a lot of us have been sort of misled during our years that we've studied that theory and law are the same thing, which they aren't. So let's talk about the scientific method, the hypothesis part. The hypothesis, as I mentioned earlier, it must be experimentally testable. So I have to come up with a hypothesis that I can devise an experiment for. Otherwise, it is pointless for me to talk about that hypothesis. It cannot be tested. Therefore, it is not a scientific problem. It goes into a different realm of ethics or other religion, other things. And so to really test something in the lab, it has to be experimentally testable. And then a hypothesis seeks to explain how a phenomenon works. It doesn't tell me why necessarily it works that way. It just seeks to explain. So it's seeking explanation of how something is working. And it tries to predict unknown results. Now, sometimes it will be correct and sometimes it won't. But the results have to be unknown. We don't know. That's why we test it experimentally. Now, once we know the results, we will know whether the hypothesis was correct or not. If it is correct, then we move on to something else. We find another question that we want to answer. But if it isn't, then we have to modify the hypothesis to make sure that it matches the results from our experiment. That is the hypothesis. Now let's talk about the theory part. Theory, contrary to a lot of people, what they believe is not proven. It is tested Okay, but it's not 100% proven. And we cannot 100% prove a theory. There's always new information that we uncover that surfaces, and if one piece of information will refute the whole theory, then that theory becomes null and void. We have to revise the theory to fit the experimental data. So that is why we say that the theory is not proven. Not 100%. We cannot say that a theory is 100% proven. What theory is a hypothesis that has been expanded into a general model. And this is because we have tested the hypothesis over and over and over with many different types of experiments, and it has held up so far. And so then we can expand it to a general model of observing a phenomenon. But once again, it's not 100% proven, because all we need is one piece of new information to be uncovered that goes against the theory or disproves the theory, and that means that the theory has to be revised. So it is supported, but is falsifiable. It is supported by experiments up to a certain point, but once again, it is not 100% proven, therefore it can be falsifiable. And it allows for generation of new hypotheses. So if I have a general model, I can generate new hypotheses because I have new questions that come up. Every new question that's generated will require a new hypothesis. And so I've heard it said that a good hypothesis will generate more questions than it answers. And that is how the scientific community proceeds with basically scientific research. We are constantly answering and asking new questions, new scientific questions that arise from certain hypotheses. We might have answered one part of that, but it generates another question, and so we have to write a new hypothesis and so on and so forth. So theory is more like an expanded hypothesis, that it has expanded into a general model. That is what it is. What it is not a law. And contrary to popular belief, a theory does not become a law. So please pay attention to this, because I will ask it, and students, because they've been ingrained to thinking this for years and years of school, they will say that if a theory, if it's eventually proven, it will become a law. That's not true. A theory is a theory and is different than a law. A theory is not, as we talked about in the other slide, a theory is not 100% proven. So what is the law then? What is the difference between the law and theory? The law is based on repeated observations. They do not give us explanations of those observations, but they give us a relationship. So the law is a mathematical relationship. That's what it is. Whereas a theory, it's a general model that tries to explain why we see these relationships. The law just gives us a mathematical relationship, a mathematical equation. Here, for example, is Boyle's law. It relates pressure to volume. It says, when I increase the pressure, the volume decreases. It's a mathematical relationship. It does not tell us why pressure and volume are related that way. That is for a theory to try to explain. The law just tells us a mathematical equation. That's it. And once again, contrary to popular belief, a theory does not become a law. A law is completely different than a theory. Theories may contain multiple laws, but the law cannot contain many theories. So a theory can contain several mathematical equations, but if I'm talking about one specific law, that doesn't contain many theories. It's included in a theory, but it doesn't contain any theories. It's just a mathematical law, a mathematical equation that has been observed repeatedly from many, many different experiments. But once again, the law doesn't give us an explanation. That is for the theory to try to do. The law just gives us a mathematical equation. So let's look at the big picture then. Here is if I observe, this is my observation and curiosity. I form a hypothesis, and then I perform an experiment. If the results are consistent with my hypotheses, it contributes to the body of knowledge. And constant observations will become a law, but not necessarily the theory. The law, this will be a mathematical relationship that comes out of all these observations that we're making. The theory, however, tries to explain what we observe by a law. And then you can see where most of the work that's been done is right here. We form hypotheses, we test them. If they agree, great. If they don't, we'll revise the hypothesis, or we'll make a new hypothesis. And so this cycle goes on for much longer than this part over here. But I want you to be very clear between the difference between the law and the theory. These two are not the same, and nor does a theory ever become a law. They're two different things. The law is a mathematical relationship. The theory is a general model that tries to explain what we observe from a law. So that is important. I will stop the part 1 of the lecture here, and then I will continue with the phases and classification of matter in part 2.